The thing for me is I wanted to almost say how hard it was. I remember Kevin J. O'Connor, who founded DoubleClick. I got to meet with him in my mid-20s, and I read his book, and he always joked like it didn't sell a ton of copies because he talked about how hard it was to like fund the company in his parents' basement, run up money on credit cards, and almost go out of business tons of time and regulation, and it's incredible. And then he always jokes, I don't know, some ungodly figure he sold for, it's hundreds of millions, and the day after Google somebody flipped it to a private equity for 1.2 billion, and he just jokes, I lost 500 million on that deal, right?
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Justin Michael. He's the founder of the SalesBorgs, a new community for sales and revops. And he's joining me on this episode to talk about sales in the future. Now, I always like to caveat these conversations with a quote from Nobel Prize-winning physicist Nils Bohr, who said, quote, "Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future," unquote. But, you know, the prospect of being wrong has never stopped me before, so why start now? So Justin has a particular point of view about what the future will hold for sales, and we're going to explore that. For instance, we've got various measures of potential: IQ for intelligence, EQ for emotional intelligence, RQ for relational intelligence. Well, Justin and I are going to talk about whether sellers will need TQ, technical intelligence, in order to fully compete in a automated future. And there's also a path from here to the future Justin and I are going to dig into, talk about some more of the pressing contemporary issues facing sales and talk about some possible solutions for those. So all this and much, much more. But before we get to Justin, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you for that. All right, let's jump into it. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Andy. I've been a longtime fan of your books and podcasts, and also a big Ring DNA fan.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, well, why not? Let's shout out. Shameless plug is great for both of us, as a matter of fact. So where have you been hiding out?
Yeah, so great question. I have been carrying the bag. I have been an operator in software as a service companies for the last 13 years. And doing my best to advance. And to do that, you kind of go from inside sales to an account executive. Mm-hmm. Over time, they give you a team. Sometimes when you're leading AEs, they'll give you SDRs. Sometimes you're running all SDRs, then you get a region. And then what you learn is the more and more you take on, that's just actually, you're playing all the positions.
Which is good training.
Yeah, and you want to be a player coach, but if you're good at prospecting, you're kind of always going to be on the phone. So that was my story. Like no matter what team I would lead, I would always kind of still make the cold calls and enjoy that and try to stay close to the front lines.
Yeah. Well, a question for you is so what's the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself during quarantine?
Oh, wow. I am like very sedentary. I can sit in one place all day. I have the opposite of ADD. I can just get lost in something I'm doing at like 6 p.m. and it's 1 a.m. And it reminds me of when I used to study things in school and just get carried away on a report or something. So yeah, I have to really make sure that I get out in the sun. I live in beautiful Southern California, but I work on different time zones. So I'm often like kind of strapped into the matrix.
Yeah, you're speaking like a true science fiction fan. Yeah, you need the Apple Watch that mine annoyingly tells me every hour it's time to stand up.
That's smart. Yeah. Luckily, I have a shepherd husky, and some chickens, so that keeps it all interesting.
Chickens, interesting. So fresh eggs.
Yeah, it's soon. They're still kind of coming online. I think a couple months here. We raised them since chicks.
Very interesting. Yeah, the neighbors don't mind. I mean, if they don't mind the clucking, then or you can bribe them with eggs, I think is the strategy most people employ. Yeah, then you're lucky. You get actually fresh eggs as opposed to factory eggs.
Yeah, so that's just a fun part. And trying to eat fresh, trying to get stuff delivered, it's kind of crazy when it takes weeks to come in. I haven't been reading a lot, but I've written the most I've ever written in my whole life. So I wrote a book, and I've been doing podcasts and blogs and all sorts of multimedia, and it's a lot easier and harder to do this stuff. That's why I do respect the caliber and quality of your blog, even getting on here and making sure we had our great mics on. So that's cool.
All right, so we're going to talk about the future of sales, and I always like to start these conversations with a caveat. which is one of my favorite quotes from Nils Bohr, who was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist from Denmark and had participated in the Manhattan Project and so on, development of the atomic bomb. And his quote is that prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. So we're going to talk about some things, and yeah, we'll invariably be wrong, but it's going to be an interesting discussion nonetheless. So, as you said, you've been writing a book, and yeah, it's taking something from what you had read. You said that that reps going into the future are going to develop TQ as distinct from EQ and IQ. So, tell us what that means.
Yeah, so there's this term, technology quotient, and I'm not really sure why it resonated so much with me or where I found it. I've seen it in Psychology Today. I think Gartner and Forrester have a concept of this. It's in Deloitte, maybe some different consultancies. Maybe it's something Tony J. Hughes talked about. But essentially, we can become more empathetic and develop our EQ. We can develop our IQ because we can do lumosity or read a lot or be creative, and our neuroplasticity can literally change. Well, we're in a world of systems. Our cars have 7 onboard computers. Everything we touch is actually tech. And human and machine can fuse. There's actually a quotient for how facile, for how seamless and superhuman the platforms come together. And so it's really important. It's the singularity in time. And my first predictions were really about 50 years from now, like Blade Runners type stuff. But what I started doing in the field as a rep is I just started buying as much tech as I could. And then I was part of a company called Outbound Works, where we raised a few $1 million. We had some good angel investors, and we started to try to build this stuff, like fully automated messaging and personalization at scale. And a lot of these are funny concepts because they sound like, something funny like jumbo shrimp or some kind of oxymoron. Like, well, yeah,
I wrote about that actually. Maybe you read that 2 weeks ago. It's just what I said.
Oh,
Enough with this. We can automate personalization at scale. I read in somebody's ABM brochure, and it's like, okay, come on, enough.
Yeah, because true personalization is really a one-to-one experience.
Yes.
So this thing could write sentences, and it could do various levels of personalization that sort of, it does pass the Turing test because you're not sure if it came from a human or a machine or an enhancement.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. But I mean, yeah, I got a message this week from somebody that said, on LinkedIn, Andy, just a personal message. They're promoting a summit they were doing. It's like, well, of course this isn't personal. First of all, use the word. This is a personal message. That was the clue right there, that it wasn't a personal message. But yeah. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked on that, but I just think that one of the holes we're digging for ourselves is maybe worrying too much about personalization and true personalization, even if it passes the Turing test, because people that receive the emails, they know what's going on.
Yeah, so our prospects are smarter than we think, and when they get that same, hey John or hey Sally, these are times of crisis, hope you're doing well. There's just so many generic, vague emails, and I think some of the new technologies that I've been looking at, they pull information. They source more quickly. So it's an efficiency play. Like Cheetah IQ, it goes into the annual report and pulls out some nuggets that you could use as snippets in the email more quickly. That's going to be kind of the future, is on the efficiency level. It's all about applying the AI and ML to the right piece of the problem.
Yeah, and there is that sort of contextual dynamic insertion of content going on right now in outbound emails, right? Which, can provide some of that feeling of personalization. But I mean, part of it sort of gets back to my first question is so you wrote that, you said you can imagine the not too distant future when I love this term you use, the SDR-AE industrial complex crumbles. So what does that mean?
So the way I look at it is applying an assembly line to sales and having a distinct opener and closer on a supply chain is just a function of looking at what a human being does to open a sale. There's a funnel that naturally develops in marketing and sales. Aaron Ross in 2011, to describe things he did to scale Salesforce as part of the team that went from 0 to 100 million, created a book called Predictable Revenue. And in many ways, it's the Henry Ford model for scaling startups, and it's been widely accepted. You raise some VC, you get some SDRs, some AEs, some sales development reps, some account executives, and you go to market. Now, this really described a motion that was popularized in the aughts, like 2007 on. Now there's been a Cambrian explosion of vendors. There's 500 going to 5,000 on the David Dulaney V6 map. There's going to be 5 billion in VC, according to Aragon Research, that's poured into the tools. And you have this environment, sales tools. Nobody wants to go public and air the dirty laundry. So the secondary market's crazy. Like in 2019, 40% of the rounds were 100 million. And if you raise $100 million and you got to sell and you got to get to 20 to 40% year over year growth, you have to hire SDRs. And so now we have this industrial complex where we're taking inexperienced people who have not had traditional sales training. And now instead of 600,000 in North America, we need 2 million just to fill these roles. And so my book is about a Tony Stark era. 70% of what a top funnel opening sales rep can do can be automated at the state of today's technology. So much like the first industrial revolution in Upton Sinclair, I always joke, right? That was the factories and meat packing, and it was problematic.
I think was really the second industrial revolution, but yeah.
You're spot on. So these days you have an SDR who's in an air-conditioned place who has to make that existential choice between a Coke Zero or a Diet Coke, right? So we're not really struggling in that regard, but I think there's something humane about giving back a rep the 70% of their time that can be spent on admin and managerial tasks. And that is a return to innocence. That's making them be human to human and sell again. So there's connect and sell, right? Like there's these parallel technologies. Ring DNA is actually an awesome technology where you have dialers and you have ways to speed up the connection rates. So there's just more conversations and better quality conversations per day. That's really the future, is a convergence of all this tech to take the admin loads off the rep that's choking them out. And that's where it's like Tony Stark in a Jarvis Iron Man suit. Maybe I should say Iron Person to make this really modern.
Well, so a question though about that is would anybody care if the SDR role, top of the funnel role, would in a few years, would anybody care if that was completely automated? Other than people that might lose their jobs, but I mean, would the buyers care?
I think the email interaction back and forth, it was very relevant, and you can get the utility out of the back and forth if there's enough machine learning and AI that you have a very inventive, creative wiki where the answers are perfect. There's a certain amount of selling, I think, even farther than transactional selling, where the neuro-linguistic programming, right, the natural language processing, the ability for machines to train themselves, to listen. A machine could be listening to thousands of answers concurrently and building a neural net as to how to answer that question, and then the future could answer in a human-like way. So people have relegated AI like, it's just going to be chatbots and it's going to do low-level transactions. It's going to get to the level where it can be strategic. And you're hearing that probably on the show here first, because I've never heard it said anywhere in the world. The Kai-Fu Lee is this AI prognosticator out of China, and I love his stuff. Mm-hmm. What the AIs won't be able to do, I mean, one brain right now is equal to all human compute, is they won't be able to love and emote and create and scope and problem solve. Right. And there are questions that you could ask that AI interactor that are going to be far complex and will always break it, but not forever.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about that time frame personally, because that's going to be beyond the scope of my lifetime and probably yours as well.
Yes.
So I'm not concerned about that. So I mean, I think we have a different issue, right? And this is triggered. Thoughts are triggered by what you had written, and some of what I read is that, we've certainly, for SaaS businesses, subscription-based businesses, we're into this predictable revenue model. We've got these specialized sales roles, and to a large degree, I think that the top of the funnel activities that we assign to SDRs and BDRs, it's questionable whether it's really selling or not. Or is it marketing, right? And that discussion's going on in lots of companies. Where does this appropriately belong, right? Because it's fundamentally a lead generation role. And so I think, to me, the equation that needs to be looked at is for SDRs to continue in human form is they need to be able to add value to the buyer, right? Because if we make an assumption that if we can automate some of this stuff, that function can be a lower cost function, buyers tend to gravitate to lower cost channels if, in the absence of added value. So if you have players, they think, all the vendors are somewhat alike, and they are going to look fairly similar. I think if they're driven by automation, if there's no added value, they'll go to the lowest cost channel. So the question really becomes what's the value SDRs can add to buyers to stay in place?
I might shock you first and say nostalgia. That's like a time machine 50 years, right? Like you can get a wax record, like a record player, and you can play on. In the future, you'll have a more premium option where you insert the human. You want a
Yeah.
human seller? Oh, that's so nostalgic. That reminds me of right. The other thing that's going to go away. So this
Well,
is
but I don't think that is nostalgic though, by the way. But anyway, we'll talk about that.
well,
Anyway.
I think that's way future. For now, the value is that the way that a human can empathize, emote, and synthesize and create context and storytelling and sort of a
Sure.
hive mind right now, that synergistic rapport level is just not something a computer can do. There's the famous one where Will Smith is talking to that female robot and she's
Right.
like she's totally on and then very awkward and then very on. And so it's like, it's going to be more like that.
Well, but the question is really about, and this is the part I think that is of big concern to me is we need to separate in the way we perceive things is certainly from the actual selling takes place once a AE gets involved. That's what I believe, right? So if you look at and listen to interactions of SDRs making outbound phone calls, which I do, I would say that these things we talk about that are so important in sales in terms of making that connection and empathy and so on. When you're just trying to sell a demo or a meeting, quite honestly, I don't see a lot of it. Yeah. It's absolutely necessary when the AEs get going and involved because this is more complex engagement at that point. But that front end, this is why I think it's vulnerable to automation. And that's why I asked the question before, but what's the value that we can have SDRs provide? Because if you're fundamentally doing appointment setting, there's not a big opportunity to get into the emotion and the empathy and the creativity and the problem solving, which AEs absolutely need.
Yes, so this is why I call it the AE SDR industrial complex, because Justin Roth Marsh wrote a book called The Machine.
He's been on my show several times. I love Justin.
Yeah, he's awesome. And so we're not playing Moneyball when we're using hammers and nails. And there's SDRs and AEs and CSMs. We need new acronyms, snowflake-like structures to teams like you study crystals. Like there's just a ton of different linkages and ways to run it, even from the 50-50 splits and OTE and forecast models, and all the software has to change. And it's a bit like when you study the planets going around the sun in like a fixed system, but then you realize like the time continuum is warped and everything is moving to the side and the planets are moving in spirals, almost like they're going through viscous liquid. Like the real structure of this stuff it's way more complicated in openers and closers. I think that's one of the mistakes, which creates an industrial complex.
Right. We need to blow it up.
Right. I do think that, because I think someone that has a skill, like we want to move SDRs from Excel to SQL. Let's say someone's awesome at targeting, so good at that. And so they learn data science and they learn SQL and R and Python and Node.js, and they learn these systems like Tableau. Mm-hmm. And then someone else is just awesome at social media. We'll put them in LinkedIn all day, creating content, interacting, and being empathetic in the comments.
Right.
So you could have like flavors of SDRs. And I talked with Aaron Ross about this and liked it. So I want to attribute it like, Skittles of XDRs. It's like, think of any specific piece of subspecialization and that becomes an SDR.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, but the thing is that the way it's currently structured is that, this is a short-term job. You're just in here for 12 to 18 months and then it's either up or out. Right. As opposed to, look, because I had this conversation with Aaron. It's like, okay, why aren't we hiring SDRs who have 10 to 15 years of experience? That's what they want to do. They're good at it. This special thing. They could be targeting or whatever. And why don't we encourage the development of that role into that degree of specialization so that actually can become a career for people, just as somebody wants to be a career salesperson?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because in an enterprise company, you have a person with a couple years experience setting the meeting to try to pique your interest. They might bant you like budget, authority, need time, and then you do it again.
As I said, blah, blah, blah. That's not qualification. That's qualification for the meeting, but it's not qualification for the business case for the customer.
And it might happen twice, and then that's a really poor experience. So to highlight this, if you think like Le Cirque in New York, a beautiful restaurant, you might have the maitre d' might be the owner who's been there 25 years, knows how all the menus were put together, the seating arrangements, right down to the fabric on the tablecloth. The most experienced person is going to greet the customer who's going to go in and have a $1,000 dinner. And I think that's why full cycle sellers have become back into vogue, is the full cycle AE who has a Jarvis around him, or acumen training for SDRs so they can really understand business case. But I would just be a proponent of, let's custom fit selling models and sales motions to the product market fit and the customer's buying process.
Shocking.
Let's
shocking.
do away
Just
with
shocking.
And Aaron himself has evolved from that model, because I think if you move to the Aaron Ross model of predictable revenue, you've shifted into the first gear, and that's important.
Let's be fair. Aaron Ross and Mary Lou Tyler.
Yes, and Mary Lou is a friend, and I love predictable prospecting.
Okay, but they co-wrote that book just just make sure everybody gets their due.
Yes, I love Mary Lou, and I felt like her book even brings like a process focus over the top of it. So I definitely suggest people read both. And I think their models actually are totally relevant. I think we're just going to see subspecialization, and we're going to see converged systems, because I think CFOs are going to say, I don't want to pay for a dialer, a data source, CRM, sales navigator, sales engagement platform, conversational intelligence. It's $1,000 per rep per month per Lars Nielsen for high growth companies is only about 15%. Someone's going to pound their fist down and say, doesn't some company make all of this in a bundle?
Well, that's consolidation is inevitably going to take place when the market's expanding, as you talked about with the number of vendors. So yeah, I think everybody's rapidly positioning themselves for that inevitability. The vendors are rapidly positioning themselves. Yes.
For sure.
Unfortunately, Salesforce can't buy all of them. So
yeah, they're going to try.
Well, they're going to be pitched every one of them, but they're not going to buy everyone. Yeah,
I love it.
So you had written something for Tenbon, an article about top 10 SDR tech stacks. That, I don't know, it's a longer title, but it was interesting. As I read the article, yeah, my takeaway was, one, oh man, we suck so bad at sales. Two, because we suck so bad at actually the selling part of the motion, is that we really have to rock the top of the funnel, because we have to feed the inefficient and ineffective sellers at the bottom of the funnel. That's sort of my takeaway from your article. And I don't disagree, by the way. I think that's one of the problems. I mean, people don't universally see it. To your point about, we're seeing increase back in full cycle reps and so on, is that, yeah, we have a business that, in most subscription businesses, that operate like a 20% win rate on the most qualified opportunities. And so you're churning through all these prospects, and you're basically playing the odds as opposed to selling.
That's a really good point. I like that whole angle as well. I have found, like, it's kind of like with vampires, like they have to be invited in the movies and the lore of vampires. The problem now is because
they have to be invited in?
I guess in a lot of the vampire movies, like they'll be on the balcony, and until the person invites them over the threshold, there's some like law of vampires that they can't come in.
Oh, wow. Okay. I gotta check that out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've equated that to salespeople. Here's what I mean is that the average CXO, like the CEO, is getting 250 emails a day, and it's getting more and more personalized. There's a lot of garbage in there too, but pretty much because buyers have researched so far, a lot of times openings to new closing. I've seen also teams where there's very competent sellers, but the company just can't get enough meetings and demos booked to build enough funnel rapidly. And I know, like Mike Weinberg's talked about it, but for every company where the issue is just closing skills, there's usually this bigger issue that not enough people are prospecting enough, right? They're leaning on these tech stacks and thinking it's marketing in a way, or inbound marketing, instead of doing the harder prospecting motions that have higher form of leverage. And this is where I talk about the Tiger Woods analogy, which is, if I have a $3,000 Big Bertha driver and he has a club from the 70s, he is going to smoke me on that golf course. I'm going to slice into the side. I'm going to hit the sand trap because I'm not a golfer. So I can keep upgrading my tech stacks, but I don't have the deeper form. What you're calling to is better training, so that when you actually do get the live fire, which is the purpose of this tech, is to free up the rep, that they need classic and traditional evergreen training on reframing and communicating and persuading and empathizing and active listening and storytelling, and it goes forever. So what's funny is all these new methods and books just unlock, more reasons that you have to go read more Andy Paul. And you're right up on all the modern stuff too. I'm not antiquating your work. I'm saying it's classic because it's not about tech for tech's sake.
Well, and I think this is one of the problems we're getting into in sales is, and you see this so much in the writing, is that, and Justin and I talked about this, and I agree with him. The premise is that after a certain level of training, it's really not, this is my take, after a certain level of training, it's not about skills improvement at that point. I mean, I had a hugely successful career in sales, and I don't think my presentation skills are any better than the next person, or, the opening calls is any better. But I think it's a change in perspective about what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? And I think that we spend too much time focusing on sort of the hard skills and not enough on, well, what's the job I'm trying to accomplish here, right? If my job is to go out and persuade people to buy my product, yeah, I think that's a losing proposition. If my job is to go out and help my buyers make a good purchase decision, not independent of whether they buy me or not, but to make a good purchase decision, I'm going to have a higher fraction of those deals close. I'm going to win a higher percentage of them. And we have this issue of the blind faith in our tech stacks that help us, but you still have to be coming from the right spot.
Yeah, I mean that's really true, right? That comes down to storytelling and messaging and positioning. It comes down to compelling value narratives. And what I find the biggest thing I see I'm preaching now as I'm reviewing what's actually being written is a lack of specificity, because you can personalize to the company, the industry, and similar clients and get some social proof, but it's still not specific enough to not seem to the prospect like, hey, this could have been automated. What I'm trying to do is hyper personalization. Just like what you did, I want to read one of Andy's articles, pull something out of a book, pull something out of an interview. Once I have 2 or 3 of those snippets of like minute 616, I credit Jeremy Donovan for helping with this definition, you're really in hyper territory. Now, the machines can be programmed to pull that level of insight, but to synthesize it into context and mash it up together, that's a uniquely human ability.
Absolutely. I mean, that's on both the buying and the selling side of things. And this is, I love the way you used the word synthesize, because I think that is actually a critical skill that is never mentioned in any sort of training or books. That will be in my new book, but is that you have to be able to take these disparate sources of information, which means you have to ask not necessarily the right questions, but you have to ask, I call them great questions, but they're going to change from context to context. You have to listen to understand, right? Instead of listening to respond, which is how we train sellers today. And then, synthesize that information into either another question, an insight, something that will provide value to the buyer. And that's not a hard skill. I mean, this is
yeah.
I mean, it's a hard skill to master, but it's not a hard skill like presentation or these other things that we teach in training. So we have to have a different way of looking at how do we train people. I mean, I think about how did I learn how to do that?
Yeah,
well, I like to think through complex things. I was a history major in college, but I didn't love the chronological history, even though unfortunately all that stuff stuck in my brain. But it was the why, right? I always wanted to know the why behind it. And this is where we're selling or shorting our sellers, let's say, is not enough of this why. And I think it's a hard thing to say. Yeah, how do we help people acquire this ability, this mindset, this perspective to look at it this way? Because it's hard to say whether it's scalable or not.
Yeah, I like the Simon Sinek simplicity of the golden circle, and taking golden circle into messaging, where you really think about the why, the customer's why.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of research into asking a why-based question versus a how, and the impact that has. If you look at Chris Voss and certain linguistics and negotiation, I'm very into words. But I think becoming a synthesizer and having that analyst skill, which is something like what a Forrester or a Gartner does, it requires reading through a lot of stuff, developing your own voice, your own take, and mashups are a great place to start. So I think what helped me to get to the synthesis point is needing to write original blogs that weren't just derivations of the other blogs. So I'd take in a few articles, really think about it, and then just start to say my opinion. Like one of my big opinions is that the third appendage, like mobile phones, will go away in our lifetime. It'll be like a typewriter. Pretty much all the computing interfaces will be wearable or heads-up display or floating in the air. I think in our lifetime that's possible, and it's good because the human body ergonomically needs to do more than sit in a chair and hold a piece of polyurethane with Corningware glass on it.
Yeah, but I can see that for sure.
Yeah, but that's from probably reading 5 or 10 books and articles and really thinking about it deeply and going over to Google and campus and seeing people wearing the glasses. And I thought it was actually pretty cool.
Right. But is it too much to expect every seller to do something similar?
What I've been encouraging sellers to do is counter culture in a way. Is there's a curation time, everyone curate, but now it's so inexpensive to put out content, whether it's an article or a blog or a podcast. It's very hard to do it at your level, and this is a world class show, which I appreciate. But if sellers can persuade and they can talk in a unique voice, it may not be grammatically perfect or great writing that's going to get a Pulitzer Prize, but funny enough, they've been writing convincing emails for years and they're subject matter experts. And if they could turn some of that content into kind of a lead magnet and automate some of it, get it out there, it would be very cool to just.
Well, I think even absent being a lead magnet, I think if they just got it out there, and this is why I encourage people, and this for people listening to the show, they've heard this before, is we have and what I love talking with you is we have a shortage of new voices in sales, people 40 and under.
Just made the cut.
You just made the cut. But we'll give a little leeway, plus or minus. And it's really, really necessary. And the way that you express that is you get started, as you've done, is you post a ton of stuff on LinkedIn or wherever you did that was basically about your experiences, things that you think, things that you've spent some time to think about, why this works, why this is, and so on. And that's the first step. And everybody has experiences. And I really rebel against this talk on LinkedIn where there's been people saying, in the sales community saying, should we be harsh on people that say stuff that just seems so obviously wrong? And it's like, no, because why do you think it's wrong? Maybe it's right? It just doesn't work for your experience necessarily, but we need to encourage more and more people to express themselves about this, because fundamentally, and you address this at a higher level, but fundamentally, sales is, this thin layer of veneer of technology we put on it. Sales hasn't changed in the last 100 years. The way we manage it, the way we measure it, I mean, it's like it needs to change substantially.
Yeah, I felt compelled after 20 years in sales in 2021. I just turned 40 to start talking about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't really get like a frequent flyer mile or a prize.
No, we should. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just realized that the stuff I was reading in my LinkedIn feed was compelling, and a lot of it was great content marketing and marketing advice. But when it came to actually convincing someone to change their organization and spend, 6 figures or 7 figures on disruptive software, I was noticing a lot of the things that do work for that are authors that haven't figured out necessarily how to go quite as ballistic as we do in social media. And so I decided, I'm going to go in there and be like Tim the Tool Time Tailor and just show you how to build a cabinet. Well, here's how I did a 7-figure deal in 90 days. And here's the tech stack I used. And here's exactly what I said and how I wrote the emails. And it's not really a pedagogy or a school or, some of this stuff is hacked together, but it worked.
Sure.
And that's kind of fun. It's an interesting voice. It's just like a practitioner voice. I still make cold calls every day myself.
Yeah. Well, and the only thing that I rebel against when I see some stuff like that, not yours, on LinkedIn, is that the implication is that, everyone's like this, right? I can do this 1,000,000 times, do my 7-figure deal in 90 days. And it's like, don't oversell it. If you did it once, share that experience. That's valuable. I don't care if you've done it 10 times or first of all, the skeptic in me never believes, based on my own experience, when someone says, oh yeah, this is easy and you can do it, replicate it 1,000,000 times. That's okay. You did it once. That's fantastic, right? How many people actually can close a 7-figure deal in their lifetime? Fine, let's learn from it. Put it out there. And I want more people to do that, right? Even if it's just a one-off, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me is I wanted to almost say how hard it was. I remember Kevin J. O'Connor, who founded DoubleClick. I got to meet with him in my mid-20s, and I read his book, and he always joked like it didn't sell a ton of copies because he talked about how hard it was to like fund the company in his parents' basement, run up money on credit cards, and almost go out of business tons of time and regulation. And it's incredible. And then he always jokes, because I don't know, it's some ungodly figure he sold for. It's hundreds of millions. And the day after, somebody flipped it to a private equity for 1.2 billion. And he just jokes, I lost 500 million on that deal, right? He's a great guy. He's really funny. His book's amazing. It's called The Map of Innovation. And it has a mousetrap on it, which is the folly of Silicon Valley. We want to make the bigger, better mousetrap. Let's just pour the VC money in, and we're not always solving the right problem.
Well, no, oftentimes a solution in search of a problem. But yes.
So as a futurist and someone that just scores that way psychologically, and some of the CEOs I've talked to, and even talking with Mary Lou Tyler, to her great credit, I asked, where should all these tool companies be building? What are your favorite features? What are your favorite things they can do? And she's like, they got to do something totally different. They got to get out of the white space, right? She wants like a follow-up engine. She shared on my show. I mean, it's like, can we think differently? Because at this point, we have another industrial complex of same tech. It's like when everyone was making a photo sharing app or a social network, we're like, there's 200 social networks. Can someone, cure COVID? Well, let's work on that one. It's like, it's too soon, but.
Yeah, but I think to follow up on your point, though, is the technology has shaped how we perceive, and Mary Lou's point is right on, is that, so I think it was Steve Norman in New Zealand sent me this, or Australia, excuse me. I keep saying New Zealand, Australia, had sent me this or maybe I had that backwards. Oh, whatever. Anyway, this diagram, and it showed 3 circles on it. And the one left, let's say, is the size of a basketball. The one in the middle was the size of a tennis ball. And the one on the right was the size of a basketball. And he said, this is the way people perceive sort of the necessary allocation of resources in sales. And the first basketball on the left is top of the funnel. The tennis ball was selling, and the second basketball was closing. And, it's just completely out of whack. First of all, closing's an outcome. It's not a process. We spend a disproportionate amount of time on top of funnel and very little comparatively on the middle, where the selling, where that actually takes place. When you look at scan LinkedIn and look at the comparative amounts of stuff written about top of funnel versus discovery and qualification and so on, which are the meat of where the rubber meets the road, where you actually win the deals. And we need to change that. And I tell people, we'll know we're on the right track when, instead of salespeople saying, well, I'm signed up to go to outbound this year, I've signed up to go to inbound this year, they've signed up to go to discovery and qualification this year. Right? Where's our conference on qualification? Where's our conference on discovery? Those are the things people need to get better at.
What's really interesting, I was talking to the CMO of Science, Eric Quanstrom. He was talking about how marketing had figured out.
He's a friend.
He's awesome, right? So marketing had figured out specialization quite a long time ago. You don't have your SEO person and your graphic designer working on your UX, and they're not necessarily buying your media or doing your branding. So they get it. Now, the sales structure is being revolutionized by specialization. And so having these conferences is more of a mission statement or political statement about, in many ways, that people have become too obsessed on inbound, because the beauty of the automated tools is you kind of can make money when you sleep, because you can send so many emails. And when I sent 1 million emails, it was for 100 customers. So I was only doing about 1,000 contacts a month, which is pretty humane relatively. But you could buy one of these things, send 30,000 emails, and just pick up the low-hanging fruit. And you're not really selling, you're order taking. But if you have enough TAM, total addressable market.
That's the way so many of these companies are doing it, though.
People warned me about my book. They said, look, you got to put a caution. So I actually have a creed in the front of like, you're going to read this book to learn about these weapons of mass communication. And the goal here is to send it in smaller batches, more thoughtfully, and to take your time and make it quality. It's just like you can drive your car 200 miles an hour, but it's no longer safe. And might be fun, but you're going to get it. You're going to get it bigger than a ticket.
And that is the lesson, though, that we haven't learned about the way we're using technology in sales, is just because you can do something like drive 200 miles an hour doesn't mean that you should. But there's not enough questioning going on about, well, how should this change? Because everybody's so short-term oriented, is all I want to do is I'm going to, goose this thing and try to get an exit or some sort of outcome from it. And we're going to see, as we already do, I mean, you look at 60% of venture funded companies at a minimum fail, right? I mean, you talk to investors, they say, I have 10 investments, 6 fail, 2 are middling successes, and 2 are okay. So this is happening. Same thing's playing out in the SaaS. It's not, predictable revenue model, the way we structure selling is not the savior. It's not the reason these companies succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just so like respect how Aaron has developed the work for the new generations, but I do believe that just looking at a sales organization and structuring it as SDRs, AEs, CSMs, here's the forecast, here's the benchmark, here's how we're going to do it. Everyone's agreeing on this model, even the commission structure. Now, what we can't change is a P&L. Obviously, if you're not making margin, you're not profiting, you don't have the good fundamentals of the business. We can't change the free market economic system, but some people are doing cryptocurrency and, distributed general ledgers and smart Ricardian contracts and doing things with blockchain that are really wild and phenomenal because of the transparency levels. But I think for now, what's an actionable takeaway?
But they don't sell. That's just part of the process. That's not influencing a customer to buy from you.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's the thing. We get hung up on the drapings, and we're missing some of the fundamental points, which is we fundamentally have a ton of companies that are implementing a certain inside sales model that's predicated on a land of plenty at the top of the funnel and poor execution at the bottom, but we put enough into the top of the funnel, we get away with it.
Yeah, it's a low-hanging fruit sausage grinder in a way, if I'm going to mix metaphors. I think what the new technology can allow us to do is point the artificial intelligence and machine learning at another problem. And that's the issue of how much selling time is being spent. So if you have a serious person who's trying to optimize for contact rates or the amount of replies or the amount of discovery calls that they can do, I think that's where this tech could be phenomenal. Because ultimately what I'd like to do is show up to work, do less than 20% of filing and admin, and the rest taken care of by robots. And I would like to be on the phone, like talking with you, being provoked, having insight, like being challenged, growing, learning, hearing your stories, your references. I gain from this. I don't gain from your templated emails.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, and you wrote about that, is you mentioned that reps are only spending 31% of their time selling. But here's the problem with that. It's always been the case. I mean, I started selling 40 plus years ago. We only spent a third of our time. The stat was the same.
Interesting.
That hasn't changed. So, and it's not going to change, right? You should never design a system assuming that number is going to change. And so as I tell people, the challenge is, how do we make people more productive with the time they spend selling? So how can I get you to go from $100 of revenue that you generate for every hour you spend actual selling, to $200? That's productivity increase. How do I get you to generate more revenue per selling hour? And that should be the metric that we spend focused on. Everything else, like quota and so on, is just, for me, is immaterial.
Yeah. So I think the way that you would apply technology to that are things like, Ring DNA and conversation intelligence, because I was actually talking to someone and she found that she was saying the exact same thing as another rep to try to handle an objection, like a common rebuttal. Mm-hmm. And they tested tone changes, and it actually was the script. It was psychologically what was said that won. But because they had it recorded and they were remote and they could go back and look at the exact same script and moment in the sale, that became a process. Handling that one objection in a certain way was a streak, and it worked. It would convert more customers, is that A/B test. And so that became then adopted by that team. And now you're using technology as the lever during the time that you're selling, making the selling more effective. So I think I'm learning from you. I'm synthesizing and playing it back.
But that is the goal, right? Like we need to. Edward Deming, who the quality control expert, has the saying. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's absolutely true. So let's change the system. Let's change how we look at productivity. If a rep makes 60 calls a day, and they make 65 the next day, are they more productive the next day? I would argue, depends. How many of those calls actually end up resulting in an order? And we should only count calls as productive that end up in an outcome. And then we say, okay, well, if that's the case, then we need to change how we look at how we make the calls, how we message, all the things that you're talking about, then come into play to say, how do we completely transform what we're doing to say, okay, the fraction of calls that they make that actually result in an outcome down the line go up.
Yeah,
and that should be our goal.
My work is about superhuman scaling, but just like garbage in, garbage out, if you don't first focus, it's so Mr. Miyagi, like painting the fence, like on your blocking and tackling. And if you don't practice that same one kick 10,000 times, then you have 10,000 variations of a bad kick. And so the fundamentals, like really the exercise is get rid of all the tech stacks, get people into a room drilling and practicing live fire. I was talking with Kevin Dorsey. He's like, I can do more in an hour one-on-one with someone, just going back and forth. Okay, start. Hey, it's Kevin. And then boom, they're flat-footed. Or, okay, try again. And drilling through live fire, then they would maybe observing that or listening to a course or a video. So that old practitioner apprentice mode of like, AI could do flight simulation, just kind of like DARPA, they're flying jets now. Mike Sherr was working on this problem, actually, a flight simulator for reps, where you talk to a computer or you talk to some recordings, but like a chess game, you turn it up to a harder mode, it starts to really stump you and argue with you. That could be helpful.
Right. But here, I think, is one of the crossroads where we're at, and unfortunately we'll have to come back and talk about, because we've run out of time, is that sales is an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
This is how people learn.
It's a trade skill.
And yes. And so until we understand how to train, that's right, reinstitute the guilds. Middle Ages, here we come. But until we learn how to really scale that, we've got problems. So anyway, Justin, it's been fantastic. Unfortunately, we got to run, but tell people how they can connect with you.
Just look for Justin Michael on LinkedIn, and my book will be Tech Powered Sales. Co-author is Tony J. Hughes, and I'm a huge
we'll have
Andy
you back
Paul fan.
on.
Thank you.
And we'll have you back on when that book comes out next year. And Justin, in the meantime, take care.
Thanks, Andy. Great show. Honored to be on.
Well, thank you. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I am ever so grateful for your support of this show. I want to thank my guest, Justin Michael, for sharing his vision with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or review and let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate that. And you can do that all on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thanks for your help with that. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.